Hey, welcome back to Joko Yo, the podcast where we talk about things that are sort of specific to Johnston County, but also sort of universal in a lot of respects. And today, there is a heck of a lot to go into, and there's also a heck of a lot of mind-blowing that's going to take place, because when I found out some of this stuff, I was like, I don't know, man. History's my thing. Obviously, that's why I'm doing the podcast, and it must be a little bit of yours too, otherwise you'll be listening to it. Well, many of us were taught, to give an example, many of us were taught that the very first Americans that came here arrived by a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, caused by lower sea levels, like a long time ago. That's the story I heard growing up, and that was the accepted story, 20 years ago. Now, the theory was that the water level was low enough and the ice was thick enough that a person or a group of people could just walk or run from Siberia to Alaska and never really know the difference because there was no difference. Asia and North America were connected. The theory held that immigration this way took place in at least 3 waves until people populated both Americas from Asia, eventually all the way down to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina and Chile. Now, the theory is there because there is evidence to support it, but not enough evidence to prove it or disprove it. When that happens, it's a theory. It's not fact, it's a theory. That's also why there could be multiple theories for the same thing at the same time, for other things. As regards the theory of the Bering Land Bridge, so when new evidence emerges for an event, it'll be placed in one of 3 categories. Either the new evidence about something is not relevant, like it has nothing to do with this, or it supports the evidence that we already have, or it contradicts the evidence. Stuff is being found all the time, which means that archaeology and history is ever changing and theories are being rewritten daily. Even if what happened definitely happened in the past, our knowledge and understanding of an event changes with the finding of new evidence. In other words, you may think you had a Cherokee ancestor because of stories that your grandpa or your grandma or your Aunt Ruth told you. Those stories are sometimes the only evidence that you might have. But then you take a DNA test or do research at the Johnston County Heritage Center or the State Archives or something like that shows Tuscarora heritage and no Cherokee at all. Well, then you have new and conclusive evidence. So new evidence becomes the new history until new and better evidence proves that theory wrong. So you see, history is not the things that happened in the past. History is things that are documented. It's not the same thing as the actual event. So the fact of Native Americans' ancestry doesn't change, but the history, the recording of the evidence, changes the narrative, changes the story. Now that said, let's check out Johnston County for a second. So the story that we always have had based on written evidence of settlers from Europe in the days of early colonization by Europeans, 1607 through the early to mid-1700s. Based on that information, the Tuscarora pretty much ran the show. The Tuscarora were who were here in most of eastern North Carolina before European incursion into the region. Now, they were in charge of trade routes throughout the region. They had control of mines, had an enormous army. These Iroquoian people, related to the Mohawk people in New York, were the bosses of eastern North Carolina, conducting treaties, farming, politics, court, trade, treaties, as I said, farming, politics, and the occasional wars before the Europeans coming south into North Carolina from Virginia and westward along the Neuse River. They played lacrosse, hunted, farmed, fished, like what people do. In fact, it is easy to find arrowheads, leather scrapers, an occasional bowl, and other tools along creeks in Johnston County. Black Creek, Continental Creek, farther east, those places are like hotbeds for finding Native American artifacts like these. And so, therefore, the fact that we can find those things, there is our evidence of Native American life. Right there it is. There's also the fact that there was a catastrophic war between them and the English settlers on the East Coast. New Bern, Albemarle Sound, the Tar River, Pamlico, the Roanoke River. There's a big war between them and the English settlers. So we got that documented evidence written by the English. Some other Native American nations that lived under Tuscarora domination for years were also eager to see Tuscarora, to see their downfall, and some of them allied with English settlers in the Tuscarora War of the early 1700s. So that's written down. There is our evidence of Tuscarora ownership and homeland of North Carolina before European settlement. There it is. We know that they were here. But here's the thing, though. All of our evidence, our main evidence, is based on English interaction with the Tuscarora. As this information is written, it is fairly reliable that they were here. So it's easy to say that any artifacts that are found here in eastern North Carolina are likely Tuscarora, but that's not necessarily correct, because, see, the whole narrative of Tuscarora being the group in eastern North Carolina and Johnston County is based on English Tuscarora interaction, which doesn't even start until 300 years ago. So what about before the English? Well, see, lots of the Native American artifacts we find here in Johnston County and the rest of eastern North Carolina have been tested and have been found to be, 8,000 years old or older. That's way before the English. If you want to do the math, you're talking like 7,700 years. So by contrast, you want to just kind of get an idea about that. By contrast, ancient Egypt, if you consider all of its kingdoms and eras together, most historians see them really as separate civilizations, but whatever. If you consider all of ancient Egypt as one, it lasted at most around 3,000 years. The idea that Tuscarora lasted here that long is definitely unlikely. That means that there had to be other groups here long before the Tuscarora. Is there evidence of non-Tuscarora groups? Well, actually, sort of, yeah, because some pottery and some arrowheads and other tools don't even match known Tuscarora styles, or even Iroquoian. Now, why I say Iroquoian is because the Tuscarora is a branch of the Iroquois, and some of the stuff that we're finding here doesn't match anything else they made. So one other way to study and determine which Native American nations lived where is not only in their artifacts, but also in their burial practices, because people, have to dispose of their dead. According to evidence and excavations conducted extensively over the last 200-300 years, the Tuscarora, just like most other Iroquoian nations, buried their dead in the ground and in individual graves, sometimes with their belongings. That's been proven and documented. But there are, in Johnston County and in eastern North Carolina, huge hills dotted all throughout the region that has been considered Tuscarora territory. For example, big hills being found in otherwise flat places like in Duplin County, Sampson County, Cumberland County, Robinson County, Wake County, all have burial mounds. Burial mounds. Not in the ground, but above the ground, and along with artifacts. Well, what about Johnston County? Well, see, those were documented. But Johnston, I met a young gentleman a few years ago that told me that there were hills in the woods near his family home that stood out all by themselves. No other hills, just flat land except for those hills. He said, and I didn't believe him at the time, that these hills ranged between 20 and 30 feet high. He said arrowheads and all sort of Native American artifacts. Dude, you could find them littered everywhere around those hills. Now, I was intrigued, of course. I'm a historian. I, of course, asked him to take pictures, draw them, whatever. Well, he came back a few days later with some arrowheads that he found. That's kind of cool. And also with photographs of not one mound, but 5 mounds, which all matched his description to a T, all by themselves in the woods. But he did more. What's even cooler what he did is that he found out that if you take all those mounds, he got a map, found out where they were, and those mounds all form a complete circle. That blew my mind. That would suggest mounds that big and that many would suggest a very large and or very old civilization on the Neuse River to the southwest of Smithfield. I was like excited beyond belief. That's my stuff. I told him that we had to get in contact with historians and let them know, but he was afraid that people would come and take his land and his family's land that's been his family for 3 generations. No matter how many times I told him that that would not happen, he persisted. And so those mounds are still sitting there, and only a handful of people know where they are. Me being one of them. So out of respect for him, I'm not going to tell either. But now this burial ring exists. I mean, it's there, but it's not documented. By choice, because he doesn't want it. Therefore, no documentation equals no history, even though we know it's there. That's pretty much how history works. So going back to the Bering Land Bridge, you see, trying to bring it full circle. Most archaeologists now doubt that whole land bridge theory. People didn't walk. They're starting to find out because of new archaeology, new evidence, new artifacts that they're finding. People didn't walk. They actually took boats. 2,000 years between boat evidence and walking across like Siberia evidence. A lot can happen in 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago is the Roman occupation of Israel, Palestine, and before TV, before trains, before cars, gasoline, telephones, tractors, Nikes, Netflix, CNN, England, United States, steel, guns, John Wayne, tobacco, Fox News, and Brightleaf hot dogs. All that stuff, and then some, is between boats and the land bridge. So obviously, a lot can happen in 2,000 years. Now, what I'm saying here is that 2,000 years I'm referring to is 2,000 years before the land bridge even opened up. That means 16,000 years of migration to America before the documentation of any European or African groups. So, like, all that stuff that could happen in 2,000 years times 8. So there's that. Now, Johnston County is actually fed by the Neuse River and by its creeks and by a couple of creeks from the Cape Fear in the southwestern portion of Johnston. Now, these bodies of water were sources of fresh water, transportation, and trade, which made Joco a magnet for thousands of years for Native Americans, for thousands of years before the Europeans came. So, I mean, really, thousands of years of Native Americans wanted to come here because of that water, way before the Europeans. So, and way before the Europeans, and way before the Tuscaroras, but for the same reasons. So if you claim Native American ancestry, the chances that your ancestor is Cherokee is pretty much slim to none. And I'm actually edging on none because there's no such thing as a Cherokee princess. The Cherokees didn't do kings and royalty, so you can't have a princess without a king. So on top of that, if you did have that, no, it's not happening. In fact, on top of that, there's not even any Cherokee here. So what about Tuscarora? Now, that's more possible, but still no royalty, and still probably not. So if you want the answer of any mysterious Native American ancestry, start looking under your feet. Read, research. Don't just rely on Aunt Ruth's stories about Cherokee princesses. It ain't so. You can't change the events of the past, that's no doubt about that, but you can certainly change history. And that's pretty much going to be it for me. And I hope you have a great day. Say, guys, anytime you wish to, send me a voice message. It's not, history's not just mine, it's all of ours. Send me a voice message. You want to contribute to the podcast, I would appreciate it thoroughly. Because, lots of you know stuff that I don't know, and I would love to include it here on Joco Yo. So, until next time, y'all be good.